Hello again, everyone. Glad to have you all back for another session of responsive design training, the RWD School of Rock. Karen already asked if there were any questions from last time, and it seems like you guys are ready to go with this next session. Today I'm going to get a little more into the nitty-gritty of how did responsive design and development sort of mesh together, and ways that we can, help transition those designs when it's time to go into programming. And from some email chains that I had with a couple people going last week, I didn't realize this before, but some of you guys are more hybrid design development, which is awesome. That's really great to hear that we have people who like to get their hands dirty with code as well as with the design and the mock-ups. And so this session might be a bit more of a repeater for those folks. And then for other folks who may not necessarily have as much experience, this will be good to kind of get an introduction as to how responsive design and development mesh together. So for starters, let's go over the DOM. The DOM is, not to be confused, there's the Don from, the Godfather, and then we have the DOM, which is the Document Object Model, and that is how developers see websites. You guys, when it comes to design, websites are kind of in layers, different Photoshop layers, they overlay each other. But from a development standpoint, the website is kind of a story. It's one long document with a beginning, middle, and end, and all of the code is in one order. And it stays in that order whether it's in a small screen view or a large screen view. So that's kind of a consideration because in Photoshop, it's really easy to say move something from the bottom of the page to the top of the page. When it comes to code in HTML, we don't have that option because the site's a story. And that comes into both keeping with good code standards and also when we talk about SEO. Now, I don't like talking about SEO that much, but I know it's a major part of what our company does. I'm more concerned about user experience. I'm more concerned about proper code standards, but the way that search engine optimization works now meshes with the proper code standards, and that if you have all of your content first and it's a story. You have all of your content first, higher up on the page, and then you have the other parts of the story, the sidebar articles, etc. Then not only can your users find it more easily, but the different search bots that are crawling the internet can also find it. So as you can see, the DOM has all the different sorts of components lined up. And websites are ultimately text files. So from a structural standpoint, you need to keep the same order through the entire site. And again, this all goes back to one of the keys of responsive design, which is a content strategy. What do the users want? What content's most relevant to them? Putting users first, putting content first, putting mobile first. They're all synonymous when we're talking about responsive design. And one example of responsive design that I'm going to reference a couple times today is the Nissan Global Careers site. This is a site that was developed by TMP. It never actually went to full production or launched because of a separate issue. The client wanted to completely redo their creative for reasons I'm not entirely sure. But you see this site and it's got the big nav at the top and all the different content and the sidebar content. But I saw the site for a very long time like this, and it's just the story of the site. You start off, there's the header, there's the logo, the title, what this is, the navigation, the table of content, so to speak. And then once you get past the navigation, you get into the actual content. So that's the story. That's the document object model. Now, just because you may see the site in this order in code doesn't necessarily mean that users will always see it in this order. For example, I'll go up to mobile nav patterns in a moment, and sometimes the navigation might actually sit on the bottom of the page, and then the user will jump to it. And that is a combination of styling and, in some cases, changing the document object model so that the content is literally the first on the page. Like right now with the Nissan, the navigation and all the header links that you see here are coded before the site content down here. But a lot of developers are moving to a different pattern where they're using styling to put these on the top of the page, the navigation, but in the source code, they're actually putting the navigation at the bottom of the page under the main content. And again, that helps with that content first strategy. Now, from a design standpoint, that really doesn't change what you're doing too much in terms of, you design it up here. It may appear lower in the code, but you design it up here. But there may be issues where, we'll have to use fixed positioning to put this nav at the top And so those are the kind of conversations you want to have with the developer. And then when you move this to the smaller screen version, then you see the nav kind of lives on the side. All right, getting back. And again, because I cannot say it enough, there is no such thing as the fold. Every piece of content doesn't have to be visible on page loads, so don't try to, the DOM is a story. People read a story, they turn the pages, they scroll down. You don't have to try to put the entire story into that first little view when the person opens the page. And again, use carousel sparingly. And this is a really great website that I found to tell people, should I use a carousel? And it's ridiculously annoying to use because it kind of auto-scrolls before you may not be ready to read it, but it basically goes through the statistics about why carousels aren't a really great design solution, and a lot of it is because users don't click through. So when you start, the further deep you get into these different links is the least likely that a user is going to see the content that you have on that page. We actually had an internal, because these statistics come from broader industry. We had an internal example. We had a slider on the home page of the Walmart custom site. And with our server, we're able to track how many times certain images are loaded. So we could see how many times the different images in that carousel were loaded because they were only loaded when a user clicked to the next page. And I think the number of times that the third image on the carousel was loaded was about maybe a quarter of the first image, just to give you an idea how if you don't have something auto-scrolling, which isn't the best user experience because then you don't always have time to read this, people aren't going to click through. So don't say, oh, we can just put it on a carousel so the user will be able to see everything. Focus on what content is important. Again, it's about telling the story, not trying to cram it all together. Let users read it. So how do we get all of this stuff to work? We've got, bring this back to small screen again. So when we're looking at the smaller screen view, we've got a completely different style, a completely different nav than the large screen view. But because this is a responsive website, this is all the same code. This is one source code with different styles that change based on the width of the viewport or what the user is looking at. And so that's defined by either the user endlessly bringing their browser back and forth like this, or by what size your phone is, if it's in portrait or landscape, etc. And how on the front end we control that is with media queries. So media queries are the CSS technique that we use to basically declare, we start with the mobile view and we say, okay, this is on a mobile, this is going to be this width, and this is going to sit here. And then we declare media query, which says at this certain pixel width or this certain point, the site is going to shift, the style is going to change, and now the style is going to use a different style. So it's all one style sheet. It's all one list of the rules for the CSS, the rules for how elements will appear at different screen widths. But it's broken into sets based on screen size. And again, we always develop mobile first, and we always ask you guys when it comes to responsive to design mobile first, because it's a lot easier to take something and then progressively enhance it and expand it as you get more screen space than it is to go the opposite way and start with this big layout and put all these images and features and then say, how are we going to cram this down into a screen? Because we never want to be cramming. That's never a great word when you're talking about design. You never want to talk about cramming something. You want things to flow. And again, I've gotten a lot of questions, especially with the responsive talent brew that's coming down the line and going to be announced on the all call next week. Spoiler alert. But breakpoints, and I've gotten a lot of questions. What are the breakpoints? When do we decide what desktop is, what mobile is? Breakpoints always come naturally based on the design, and that's definitely a place where the designer and the developer have to work together and see. At what point does this layout just not look right? What point does the mobile view or, really big buttons and hit points that someone would use on a phone, at what point does that just look weird? At what point does that not fit anymore and we have enough space to expand the way we're doing things? And there are a lot of different responsive design tools that have come up. Someone sent me a link last week for one that I cannot, for the life of me, remember. I'm going to attempt to look at my email now to see what it was. if the person is on the call. It was Tom Hoffman asking me about Macaw. Okay, Macaw is one design tool that might be worth looking into because it lets you build, they're static, they're not full websites, but you can design them like their websites. You can set different breakpoints and within one file change the way things look. An alternate is Adobe Edge Reflow, which we actually in New York had a presentation. A representative from Adobe came and talked to us about Adobe Edge Reflow, and it's the same concept. This has the advantage of being part of the Adobe suite, so you can actually import and export Photoshop into the Edge Reflow program and then start creating these responsive designs, kind of more living designs that will scale in and out as you need. And it also lets you set colors with the same kind of declarations you'd use in CSS. So it gives you a bit more of an overlap so that design and development aren't so siloed off anymore. And an example just of breakpoints coming naturally on the Nissan site. You see we have these 4 modules at the bottom. And when it's small, we have them spread across, but as you can see, the image starts to get blurry. It's not the best, so we pull it up, and now it sits 2 by 2, and then 4 by 4. And again, this is all media queries saying at a certain pixel width, change this width from 1/4 of the page to 1/2 the page, and so forth. All right, so now some navigation patterns, because navigation is another issue where there's no one answer to how it should be done. It really, again, varies on what kind of content you have, how many links you're looking at, and how the rest of the design fits around the navigation. And as I said before, in terms of the document object model, the navigation should actually sit a bit lower on the page. The idea being that the page content, or what the user came for that page for, is as close to the top of the page as possible so they can get there right away. But we still want to make sure the navigation is really easily accessible, both for normal users and for users who may have disabilities, who may be using a keyboard instead of a mouse for navigation, who may be using assistive technologies or screen readers. So with a combination of clever design, some clever development, and the right CSS styles, we can get both and we can satisfy all those needs. So I have a couple of different examples of patterns. One is the off-screen menu, and this is a demo that I had done for, I believe, Bank of America, just as a proof of concept. And so as you see, what happens here is on a small screen version, there's the site. When you click this button, the content of the site slides out, and you see the menu. And then what happens on the larger screen is that menu just sticks there, and it's on the side all the time. So I'm using some styles to just hide it, and then when you click it, it's using JavaScript to apply a different style that slides the entire page over. And then when we have enough room on the page to sit the menu, then the menu can sit there the entire time. The other example is the slide out from Nissan, which you have seen already. So it's kind of the same concept, except instead of pushing the main body content over, it just sits over top and then is allowed to expand as needed. Oh, and also if you didn't know this, the presentation site that I'm using is also responsive. So if you're ever, bored one morning and waiting for something and have your phone out and want to remind yourself on responsive design, this site totally supports that, because I know that's what I do. Yeah. A note on these kind of menus, fixed positioning is, I say avoid it. Phones are becoming better about supporting it, because a lot of the issue with fixed positioning is when you get to a smaller screen or a phone, sometimes it won't stick exactly where you want it, or when you scroll, it'll kind of stick in the middle or in a weird place. So fixed positioning is something you kind of want to do on a case-by-case basis. Talk with the developer, maybe build some quick proof of concepts to see if that's something that's going to work or if it's just going to be too complicated, because fixed positioning menus are nice sometimes in that, like this menu is actually, it's fixed so that whenever I scroll, I know where I am and I have access to all of the other parts of the page at one time. But this also works because it's a very simple menu. If you've got a menu with a bunch of different levels and drop downs and things, fixed positioning might cause more problems than it's worth. And a jump link menu, in terms of a mobile navigation pattern, this site is an example. So we have this site, and at the top of the page I have this menu button, but this isn't going to trigger any JavaScript or anything to slide anything or move anything. It's literally just an anchor link that pops you down to the bottom of the page. And then the actual code for the nav sits here. And then you can use the back to top link to pop yourself back to the top. And then on larger screens, I just position that menu fixed at the top of the screen. And you can do that same kind of nav pattern without having this fixed at the top. You could do something where it's absolutely positioned so that the nav would just sit at the top of the page here, and as you scroll, the nav would go away and scroll with the rest of the page. And yeah, this is a nice pattern because it gives kind of a consistent, it gives users, when they scroll down to the end of the page, so I've read this article, I've read this, it gives users a place to go next. So, okay, I've read all of this instructions, where are other places on the site that I can go? Which is a nice argument for using that kind of navigation pattern. And when thinking about navigation and thinking about responsive design, you also have to think about which different devices you're using. And this is a graphic that I stole from, or lovingly stole, I guess, from, I believe, Luke W., who is a really great responsive developer designer. I'll make sure to send out his information with a follow-up email, just so you guys can take a look at his website. I went to an event apart, which is basically a gigantic nerd fest of a bunch of developers talking about different technologies and different advances in web development and IXD and design. And part of his presentation included this chart, which shows you, if you're holding a device with your hands, where are the easiest places and the hardest places to reach. And if you notice on tablets and on computers, because now we do have laptop computers with touch screens, the places that are easy to touch are down here, but yet for some reason a lot of menus and site menus, even this one included, is an example, put this in the hard to reach. So thinking about, if you're doing this on a mobile device, where can I put the menu button so that it's easy for people to reach and hit points are easy to reach? And so somewhere up in the top corner might be okay, or somewhere down along the sides is okay. But up here at the top, when someone is holding the device is holding the touch screen, it's going to be hard for them to hit those points without having to, if they're holding it with two hands, have to reach up and tap with one hand. Now, this doesn't mean that it's completely impossible and that you can never put the nav there, but it's a consideration if you know that a site is mostly going to be used on mobile devices. For example, a promotion site for recruiting, a lot of times is going to be used mostly on smaller screens versus large screens. So those are things to keep in mind.
Hey, Plum?
Yeah, what's up?
About the mobile side, the one on the left. I mean, do we have to care about handedness, like left-handedness versus right-handedness? Because the imbalance of that makes me think that it's, for someone who's, I guess, left-handed, that would be their chart.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is the right-handed, because the idea is your hand would be here on this bottom corner. Can you see my mouse pointer as I'm moving it?
Yep.
On the screen. Okay. Your hand would be here, and then your thumb would reach over here. So your hand's here and your thumb, because it's easier to hit here, because here you kind of have to like scrunch your thumb back to get to this part, and here's a bit of a reach. But I think this is for right-handed. But yeah, that is kind of, when it comes to the one hand, that is an interesting conundrum. And I guess it's a good question, honestly. Because I mean, you would think, how many people are right-handed versus left-handed, that sort of thing. And so then maybe the idea is, if you're not sure, try to put more of your nav towards the sides, because then it's going to be okay for both people, no matter what, and try not to bias towards one corner or the other. Yeah, because I know a lot of people who are left-handed, so I'm not going to say just ignore them, because they'd be upset with me.
Less of them.
Yeah. And then again, browsing for inspiration. All of you guys go online all the time. A lot of you go online on your smartphones, mobile phones. Look at nav patterns. Look at the way other sites are handling it. If you ever see something and you think, oh, this would look really great on another site, send it to the developer who's on the site you're working with and say, you know, could we do something like this? Is this something that makes sense for our content? It's totally okay to steal from other people. That does not make you any less of a designer. All right, so before I move forward, because I threw a lot of technical stuff and then a bunch of random websites at you, anyone have any other questions not having to do with left-handedness?
There were actually 6 more questions about left-handedness, but you said no.
Okay, we'll have to hold them for the end. Moving on, web fonts. So Karen, can I get a survey in the room of how many people are familiar with or have used web fonts in a site?
Roughly half, slightly more than half the room.
Okay, so that's good. You guys have had some experience. I'm just going to go over a couple good sources and reasons why you should be using web fonts and be considering web fonts even when you just start working on the design because once you're working on the design, you're thinking about programming to an extent. So again, the reason that fonts can be tricky on sites is because the site is drawing off of what fonts are on a person's computer. So I may have Helvetica loaded on my Mac, but not on my PC. So this site I think loads in one font, or, well no, I'm actually using a web font. But if I had this in Helvetica and Arial as a font stack, it would show up as Helvetica on my laptop, but then on my PC sitting directly to my left, it would show up in Arial because my PC doesn't have Helvetica. So one way around this is just always stick to like the basic font stack of Arial, Helvetica. But that's boring, and we don't have to limit ourselves to that and still get a consistent browser experience. In the past, we've done things like image slices for text, which is a big no-no. I completely refuse to do that on all sites because not only does it load the sites down because that's another image loading, it makes it very difficult to maintain. So every time text needs to change, they have to get a new image. And it's also a major accessibility issue. As I'll show you in a minute, anyone using a screen reader to browse a site isn't going to be able to necessarily read that text or understand it in the context of the rest of the site. And also, when you have something like text in a banner image, and then you scale it down for small screens, it can be very difficult to read, almost illegible. So that's where the wonderful world of web fonts comes in, because web fonts pull the font files from the internet so that no matter what computer you're on, as long as your browser can support loading web font styles, which most modern browsers can, then you can have the typeface you want across all browsers. My absolute favorite source of web fonts is Google Web Fonts. A, because they're free, which means we don't need to worry about licensing. B, they have downloads of both the web font and also the regular like TTF or OTF file that you can use in Photoshop, so that you can pick a font on Google and design with it in Photoshop statically and then send the developer the link to what font it is on Google, and they can just pull that CSS in. And so you have the same font. You don't have to worry about, oh, well, this kind of looks different on mine versus yours. It's the same font that you're designing with and developing with. And it's also really great. Not only do they have a lot of fonts, but they're really easy to browse through. You can pick by thickness, you can pick by serif or sans serif, you can change preview text, see what it looks like, big or small. So I've always strongly encouraged Google Web Fonts in design. Another option is fonts.com. Fonts.com is good for when you need a font that is licensed by a foundry, something that needs to be purchased. So if you're using a special version of Helvetica or something that isn't an open source or a free font, you're going to need to get it through fonts.com and pay for the license. And that's licensed based on page visits, so that's something that if the client is specifying, I need to use X font for my branding, or if the designer says, you know, we really need to use this font for this design and there's not really a good alternative that's free, then they need to look at the site metrics and see how often the page is visited, because that determines the license. And then Font Squirrel is a good option for if a client has a custom desktop font that needs to be made into a web font. We had that issue with Nissan, actually. This font is Nissan's custom font that they had someone make this font specifically for Nissan, but they didn't have a web font version. So I got permission from Nissan to convert it into the web font files that I could then use for development. And again, the major caveat with Font Squirrel is you can only use it if you have permission to use this font on the web. You can't say take the Helvetica files on your desktop and try to convert it into a web font, because that's definitely illegal. Just a word warning, web fonts can be really exciting. Try not to go too, well, I guess depending on what you get excited by, but I get really excited by web fonts. But remember, every time you load a web font on a page, you're loading more information on that page. You're loading another font file, which weighs down the page. And since one key component of responsive design is optimization and making sure that you aren't overloading the pages with too many images, fonts is the same way. You probably want to stick to 1 or 2 web fonts on a page instead of trying to load a lot. Like, you can use it as much on the page as you want. It's not like every time I load a letter of this web font, I'm making the page heavier. But if I had this web font and this web font and then 3 others, I'd start to lag the page. It would start to affect the page performance. And that negatively impacts user experience, which is something we always want to avoid. All right, another quick break point. Does anyone have any questions about fonts?
Have you guys used fonts.com or sorry, or Google Web Fonts or any of that? Some yeses, some no's. Are you guys gonna use them now? Yes, resounding yeses, at least from Pete.
Yeah, Google Web Fonts also has a lot of really fun. It has nice, you know, like this is Open Sans, the typeface that this is. It has nice plain fonts, and then it has a lot of really fun styled up fonts. Both of these are Google Web Fonts, Open Sans and Sigmar 1. Yeah, but highly recommended. All right, if there are no other questions about fonts, we're going to go on to accessibility. Now, accessibility isn't something that's necessarily specific to responsive design, but it's something that we should always keep in mind. And since I've gotten your attention, I might as well use this time to remind you guys about accessibility and how responsive design needs to respond to more than just screen size. You also have to accommodate for different input types. And this can be really tricky because if you have a button, you're designing that button for someone that might be tapping it with their finger, might be hitting it with a mouse, or might be tapping to it with their keyboard. And so you have to kind of have all those things swirling in the back of your mind while you're designing. Things like with links, hover states and focus states. So if I mouse over a link or if I tab over to it, does it change in some way that I can see, okay, this link is highlighted, this is something I can click on. And so that's something to remember, again, in any design, not just responsive, but key to remember in responsive. And I actually pulled together a demo video, which I'm going to, hopefully you will be able to hear. I need to open up GoTo again, because I'm on the phone, but I have the audio coming from my laptop. So hopefully you will be able to hear this, because this is a test. I ran through a couple of different sites with a screen reader. So using it as someone who is blind would use the internet, basically tabbing over to different things and then listening to what they are. And to show you kind of the different ways in which, how making a site accessible can improve the user experience. So hopefully if I turn this on.
Okay. Oh, no, you can't hear it. All right. So
I have to have it turned on.
I have to have myself talking in 2 places. All right, can you guys still hear me? Okay. All right, I'm using my microphone and speakers now just so you can hear this video.
TD Ameritrade. Link. Skip navigation. Visited link. Search jobs. Or. Enter keywords. Enter keywords. Edit text. Search jobs button. Heading level 2. Contact and social navigation. List 4 items. Link. Returning applicants.
So if you saw right there, or you heard, it said that heading like list of social connect. Even though that text didn't appear on the actual site, it said that, and that's a bit of hidden helper text that we put in for accessibility purposes.
Link. Contact us.
Okay, so this, I think this is where I've gone through a site, and I'm not going to show you it. You're just going to listen to it, and then we'll go to it again.
TNP Worldwide, LLC. Navigation with 8 items. Home, link. Our work, link list item. Our expertise, link list item. Look, connect, link list, link, button, tweet, link. This page has been shared 52 times.
Hey, Plum, we can't really hear it through the video, but since it's on the page, what we can do is when you send around the presentation, everyone will can listen to it then.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do then is I'll just tell you what was going on there. What was happening is you were tabbing through the links, and so you heard the main navigation, and then you heard Facebook and tweet, and this page has been shared 12 times or whatever. But the main point I was trying to make there is you were hearing all of that before you got to the site content, and that you had to tab through all of those links. There was no way to get over it. And if you look, I'll just show you the visuals so you can see what's being focused on there. And as you see, there's no way for the user. They have to pop through all of those different links in order to be able to get, see, you know, they hit the Facebook before they hit the rest of the site and the content down here. And again, part of that is a function of programming as well, that it was not programmed properly. But part of it is just thinking about, again, that content order and what's most important. And there are different accessibility tricks we can throw in there on the dev side. But from a design side, it's important to think about, like, you know, the common searches. They are mildly useful to the user, but if you want to get around them, you've got to tab through all of them. So here, like, they put these common searches in content order before the recent jobs. And you think the recent jobs might necessarily be more important. There's stuff that you want to feature, and the common searches are just kind of suggested searches. But because of the way they're placed in the page order, you have to tab through all of those to get down to where you want. And one last that I wanted to show, this is just a general of why I hate social plugins. So this is our old TMP site. And as you're noticing, because of the way that the social widget is programmed, it's a third-party widget, so it's nothing we control. As you're tabbing through it, it just keeps catching you, so you can't ever tab out of it. And that's a major accessibility issue. And then down here, if you ever want to try out screen readers for yourself, Mac has VoiceOver utility built in, which is really nice. And it's a screen reader. And Windows has NVDA, which is a free resource if you ever want to just load it up on your screen and try browsing a couple websites, because it'll really change the way you think about building the web, designing the web, and using the web. All right, before I move forward, any other questions?
If anyone else wants to see how screen readers work and all this stuff work, I know Chris has done some, he's gone to some sessions and also done some trial versions of this kind of stuff. I know he presented it at a PM team meeting a while back. So there are resources here, and it's quite enlightening. You see just how unusable some of our sites are.
Just I just want to add a little note about accessibility, you know, because this is essentially what I say whenever I do an onboarding, and I'm trying to educate folks on the subject of accessibility. I usually, you know, a lot of people come into it thinking, well, you know, it's just for blind people and stuff like that. But essentially what it comes down to is accessibility is about making something completely accessible to, you know, every single person on the planet, regardless of, you know, any disabilities they might have. So, I mean, even at the design level, when you're dealing with colors and things of that nature, it's very, very important to at least keep it in the back of your head while you're designing. You know, things like contrast could have, you know, an adverse effect on someone who may be colorblind, or, you know, something like that. So just be mindful of it as you're moving forward. And accessibility is also a very broad term. It not only, and you know, to speak to what Steph already mentioned here, it's not about making something accessible to, you know, search engines and you know, people who have disabilities, but also making it accessible on all of the different devices, you know, that are out there right now. So it's something that we keep that we consider extraordinarily important in everything that we do, not just when we're asked to make something accessible for a particular client. So that's
right. Absolutely. And again, the SEO, I hate using that as an argument, but sometimes there'll be clients who won't necessarily want to change a color or will want to add something that's not a good idea from an you know, you may not like it from a design standpoint, and it's also an accessibility issue, but the SEO argument can sometimes sell clients who may not be like, oh, I don't care about accessibility, you know, saying this will also impact SEO. Sometimes.
Wait, what? Okay,
yeah.
all right, change it.
Yeah. Yeah, once you pull money into the picture, then it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So now everyone's favorite part of school, the homework. We had everyone in the U.S. do a design challenge, and we're going to assign the same thing to you guys. Basically what this is a responsive redesign. We're going to give you guys an example of an existing Talent Brew career site homepage, and we want you guys to take it and make that one page responsive. So basically take the same content and the same branding, but forget everything, like existing layout doesn't matter, anything else that you see. Just take the content and branding and remake the page responsively. So you may want to reorder the content because you see a way that's better or makes more sense with the idea of content focus, go for it. As long as you keep the basic branding, that's the only real constraint in terms of that. I've assigned you randomly to work on one of 4 different pages. Again, the page must be fully responsive, so it's got a flow from small screens to large screens. And again, design should only focus on the site content. Yeah, use your best judgment in terms of content order. And I think one of the examples might be a Talent Brew. Don't worry about any of the limitations that you might know of in terms of Talent Brew design for something that, oh, we can't do because of Xcode or whatever. That's not, this design is just kind of to get you used to thinking responsively without those other constraints. Again, the page should be designed with a mobile-first mindset. I'm going to ask you guys in the end to deliver 2 mocks, one the mobile size view and one the desktop or large screen size view. And I'm encouraging everyone to start with the small screen with the mobile layout and do that first and then move on to the desktop. And I know some people, that's kind of a different workflow from what they're used to. Some people will do something where they'll do a bit of work on the mobile, then they'll jump back to the desktop, they'll jump back to mobile. That's fine as well. I just want to make sure that everyone is starting with that mobile mindset, that small screen mindset, just to get a sense of how we should really be designing and how we're thinking about web content. Because starting with the small screen really helps you focus on, okay, I don't have a lot of space for a lot of frills. What do I need to get on this page? What's important? What is the content focus of this page? During the design process, keep your workflow responsive. Everyone's also been assigned to a front-end developer in London, and Spell and I are also available for questions. So if at any time during the design process you have something that you aren't really sure how it should look or would this work, or you just have general questions, feel free to reach out to one of us so we can discuss your ideas. Because again, moving forward with the workflow, and I think you guys may be doing that a bit more than some of the offices here, keeping that workflow very responsive, keeping development in the loop from beginning to end so that you can create a better product and not have those issues of, oh, we just moved into development, but this doesn't work and this doesn't work and we need to change X, Y, Z. As terms of deliverables, as I said, final mock-up should be submitted to myself by Friday, February 21st, end of day. One small screen and one large screen. It can be a PSD, PDF, or JPEG. I'm not particularly picky, whichever file format works best for you. Again, for the purposes of the exercise, the designs don't have to be fully polished because I know client work comes up. You might not be able to get a full, perfect Talent Brew design, but at the very least, get the basic idea of this is where content will sit. This is kind of the color scheme that I'm thinking of. It's more about how will this work transitioning from a small screen to a large screen. I know a couple of copywriters in the US did the design challenge and they just wrote stuff out on paper. It was just pen and paper. This is what this will do. This is what this feature is. This is what this content is. And that was perfect. I mean, I always encourage people to do as much as they can, make it as polished as possible. But as long as you get the basic concepts down, that I will be more than happy. After you submit your files, we're going to review them. The front-end contact will review them, provide you with notes, and on different ways you can improve. You don't have to submit revisions then or anything, but just things to keep in your mind moving forward to future designs when you're actually doing client work. Again, the point of this exercise is about proving site design and code. It's not about, just criticizing you for criticism's sake. In terms of development, we all had, I as a developer, everyone else had to do a responsive development test where we got a page and we had to build it responsively and had code reviews. So we want to bring you guys into the same sort of process so we can get more discussions going and get more of those questions out there. I have an assignment spreadsheet, which is on this link, and it shows there are 2 tabs at the bottom. The first tab is what clients are available and the current site URL. So this is the URL you'll be working off of where you're getting your content and your branding. And then the second page is the assignments, which client, your name, which client, and the developer who will be doing the review. And going back to the presentation site. So we will reconvene as a group on March 4th to review the designs and kind of get your feedback on how you thought the process went, where you see need for improvement, and then thinking more broadly about integrating this aspect, the design and development, into the rest of the workflow at PMP and how we move from when the client request first comes in to the final delivery and keep everything responsive and keeping everyone in the loop, and what sort of ways we can improve on that workflow. So that is what I have for you guys today. Are there any sort of questions either about the assignment, anything we've discussed, anything else responsive in general?
Everyone excited? And yes, this time has been booked in the resource planner with Sarah and Ryan. So the time when it's in is it doesn't have to happen on that day, but hopefully everyone should be able to have one day sort of carved out to do the work. Everyone is super excited.
Oh, yeah.
I can hear the excitement. I can hear the excitement.
It's the end of the day. A little laggy, but yeah, everyone good? If there are any questions, of course, you can always email Plum or ask Ben, Harlow, or myself.
Yes, absolutely. I'm always welcome to receive questions, and I will be mailing out this presentation, and hopefully this audio cast will work. The one last week, the file got corrupted, but I've tried a different recording method, so this should hopefully I'll be able to get that out to you guys as well. And in the meantime, happy designing.